All right, hey everybody. So we're having problem definition session. I'm joined by Graham Smith. Thanks, Graham. I wanted to ask you to have a think about this, the fact that we've got these two different types of assemblies that are sort of swimming around in the space. There's the sortition-based kind of citizens assembly model and the people's assembly or popular assembly or, I don't know, community summits or whatever. There's loads of words for it, but it's kind of the same type of thing. Can you just say briefly what the difference is? And then I'm going to ask you to help us formulate a question around it.
Yeah, sure, no problem. The problem is people use the words interchangeably, so it can be a bit of a nightmare. But the way that most people think about it with the idea of the popular assemblies is really just creating a space where anybody can come into that space. They can raise ideas and hopefully develop collective strategies for responding to some of those issues. But it really is a space of mobilization, a space of listening, a space where anyone is welcome. It's often used. It's being used within the Humanity Project for localities. It can be used within social movements to make decisions quite quickly about what we're going to do. And it really is that kind of idea of creating a safe space for people to listen to each other, hear each other, think about the issues they've got to face, and think about what are we going to do now. And it's very much that kind of model.
Yeah.
And that, I think, compares to something like a sortition assembly or an assembly selected by democratic lottery or random selection, whatever word you want to use. And there, what the logic is you're trying to get a diverse group of people who look like the wider society, who sort of think like the wider society, and you're bringing those people together into a space. So these aren't people who necessarily would have chosen to be there. They've been invited to be there. And through a process of democratic lottery, of sortition, you've made sure that it looks like the wider society in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, and any other characteristic you're thinking of. So I think they're less about mobilization, really. They're more about generating a kind of collective judgment or using the wisdom of the crowd, citizens, sort of an idea of public wisdom coming out of this. And I think so they get confused, but they really are very different things.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that's very present in my life at the moment, but in the movement is and the academic space probably as well, is that you've got all these movements, including the Humanity Project, which I've been working on, but also lots of other groups organizing local assemblies, putting together programs for them, designing mobilization strategies for them, and a lot of them really are pointing towards a sortition-based chamber. So whether they want to replace the House of Lords, institute a new chamber for the government at like large, which is a lottery-based system, or have a whole constitutional redesign and spin off politicians and have loads of these kinds of models that do loads of the function at the top of national politics. There's sort of a spectrum of things people want, but a lot of people are using this kind of grassroots self-built model in order to sort of aim at the other one without, I don't think there's much critical sort of discourse about what that means. And some people have been very worried about it and some people have been very excited about it. And when we spoke before, I thought you had some good ideas about what might be the right question we need to ask ourselves.
Do you mean in terms of how they relate to each other, or do you mean in terms of so I mean, one of the really interesting questions we've got to think about, and it's your lived experience at the moment, is how do we relate those kind of popular assemblies or pops, whatever you want to call them, with this other body, with a sort of sortition chamber, whether it's whether you're running this as an independent counterpower to government, or whether it's a replacement of the House of Lords. And I think it is challenging, but there are different ways you can do it. I mean, one, for example, is that you can think of agendas being set by popular assemblies, which are then picked up by the sortition assembly. You can think about those things that are being dealt with in the sortition assembly becoming subjects of discussion within local popular assemblies. You can think of what comes out of the popular outcomes. You see, I'm getting the mistake now. What comes out of the sortition assembly being something that's then picked up locally. So I think the really exciting thing is about how we think about those connections and how we think about those designs. I think one of the mistakes that's sometimes made is those people who are really active in the popular assemblies think, well, I should now have a place in the sortition assembly somehow. And I think we've got to be really careful about that, because the whole power of the sortition assembly is these are people who are not the kind of usual political activists, and that is their power. That's a really good way of breaking the power of vested interests. It's a good way of making sure we've got that diversity, and we're hearing that. So that's got to be respected. But there's no reason that the kinds of work that are being done in these two spaces can't start interacting with each other. And that's really sort of the exciting agenda. And I think that initially, I can imagine that a sortition body would be dealing with some of the issues that are coming out of the, because I'm sure you're seeing it, that across these different assemblies, there are similar kinds of questions emerging, whether around a cost of living, whether around climate crisis, so you can imagine that being some part of the agenda setting process. And in the end, when the things come out of these sortition assemblies, somebody's got to act on them. And it isn't always going to be government that's going to act. And in fact, part of your work is the realization that government doesn't act on these things. So it's going to need to be different bodies, whether these are the popular assemblies or whether there are other sorts of civic organizations. So I think the idea that I know a lot of the people working in the sortition space are really protective of it and are thinking, no, you don't come anywhere near my sortition assembly. You're going to corrupt it. But actually, I think we really need to think about, particularly afterwards, that question about what happens after an assembly. Who's going to own those recommendations? Who's going to advocate for them? Who's going to work on them? Who's going to make sure? Who's going to figure out what they mean for our locality? And I think that's really where the exciting dynamic comes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think the question is, what's the relationship, and how can we make it interesting, productive, self-reinforcing, generative and positive?
Yeah, and I think really recognizing what the dynamics of each of the dynamics of those spaces are different, and that we must recognize and celebrate that difference, and recognize that sometimes they'll be in productive tension, and sometimes they may actually come in conflict with each other. But the institutions in any system come into conflict with each other at points. We see this all the time with our existing democratic structures. We're not going to be able to design a perfect system, and I'm always worried about those people who've got the kind of like diagram, and this is going to go here, and this is the flow diagram. They're usually physicists or mathematicians, and I apologize if I offended anybody, but there is going to be, we're going to work this out by doing it. Yeah, and I think that's a really exciting thing. So there's no kind of like pure blueprint. We're gonna figure this out by actually getting our hands dirty and doing this work.
Great, thanks very much, Graham. Well, I'll see you on a round table to find out some of the answers.
No, but I think that thing about I always steal it. I'm stealing the doing the work from you, because you